What is the minimum amount of equipment that you need to blacksmith? It turns out it's not that much. While there are countless tools that you can make or purchase, most of these aren't necessary to get started. So what is necessary to start? You are going to need a forge. There are three categories of forges. There are coal forges, gas forges, and induction forges. Coal forges are the easiest to make at home, in that they have the simplest construction. However, sometimes it is difficult to locate blacksmith coal to use in them. For blacksmithing, you want a specific type of coal, and that is bituminous soft coal. This is different from the coal used in heating, which is anthracite hard coal. Some places you can locate it without any problem, but some places it's a little hard to get your hands on. The second, and my personal favorite, is a propane forge. These can also be made at home, but there's a little more that goes on in them, and they can be bought pretty inexpensively online. While some gas forges use natural gas, the predominant amount of them use propane. Propane is pretty easy to source regardless of where you're at and doesn't stink of sulfur when it burns. The other benefit of propane is that it heats up your piece very uniformly regardless of the shape or thickness of it. Additionally, it's very easy to burn a piece of steel in a coal forge if you're not paying attention, but this is much more difficult in a propane forge. The third category is induction forges. These use an electrical current in order to heat up the piece of steel. I, however, have never used one of these and can't speak too much about them. The benefits that I do know is that they're very quick at heating up a piece, and it's not a struggle to try and source fuel. If you do go with a propane forge, I highly recommend that you stay away from any forge that uses ceramic wool insulation. Ceramic wool is an incredible insulator, it's incredibly cheap, but it's also very carcinogenic. So do future you a favor, get a fire brick or cast refractory forge. The second piece of equipment that you're going to need is an anvil. This needs to be a solid piece of steel that doesn't deform or crack when you strike it. There are different styles of anvils. These are called patterns. However, when you're starting out, you don't need a specific pattern of anvil or even a very nice anvil. And as anvils can be very expensive, you can save yourself some startup cost by using something a little more inexpensive. In the description, I will put a link to a video I made on improvised anvils. When you are looking for an anvil, bigger is better. The larger the anvil, the more rebound it will have, and so the more effective it will be. The most important thing is the condition. How smooth and level is the face, as having a very precise anvil face and precise anvil corners will help you later in doing precise work. The next thing every blacksmith needs is a hammer. Though, you can look at them kind of like a cup of coffee. Why just stop at one? Most all hammers for blacksmithing will have two sides. They'll have a face on one side and a peen on the other. While there are exceptions to this, and quite frankly countless patterns of hammers, the most common pattern is a cross peen hammer. This has a face on one side and what is called a cross peen on the other side. This allows you to spread metal directional. So if I strike it like this, it spreads this way. And when I strike it like this, it spreads this way. In order to move your piece from your forge to your anvil so you can hit it with your hammer, you're going to need a pair of tongs. And several pairs would actually be very beneficial. It's not good to waste money. However, I would highly recommend, if you can afford it, to spend some money on getting a couple good sets of tongs. It's very important that your tongs fit the piece that you are working with. Because when tongs don't fit well, metal has a tendency to go flying. When I first started blacksmithing, none of my tongs fit anything I was working on. And I spent more time at the anvil picking up the piece that went somewhere than actually hammering. While normally I was able to find the piece, usually it was by looking for the smoke of whatever it landed on. The two pairs of tongs that I use the most are V-bit bolt tongs and wolf jaw tongs. V-bit tongs are designed to be able to hold square or round stock of a particular size, and they hold it very securely. The ones that I have were about $30 and were worth every bit of it. Wolf jaw tongs are designed to be able to hold most any shape, and they excel at holding unusual shapes that other tongs wouldn't be able to fit. The ones that I have cost around $60. While this was pretty steep, they were definitely worth it and did pay for themselves. Periodically while working, I will need to cool down my tongs or the piece I'm working on or my hand because I touched something I shouldn't have. And so for this, I always keep a 5-gallon bucket real close to my anvil so it's right there when I'm... This is also going to be very important if you have a coal for it, as in order to tend a coal fire, you need to routinely sprinkle water around the outside so you're not wasting coal, but also so that the impurities bake out of the coal prior to it making contact with your metal. And now the only other piece of equipment that you need to start blacksmithing is a pair of safety glasses. These are pretty self-explanatory. Here are some other tools that you may already have, which will help you a lot while blacksmithing. First being a vise. Vices are very handy, particularly for doing twists. There are vices made for blacksmithing. These have a post which transfers the energy down the leg into the ground. You do not need one of these to get started. You can do a lot with just a bench vise, as much of what you will do will simply be twisting. Bench vices will not work well for high impact work, but likely as you're starting off, a very small percentage of what you do in a vise will be high impact. The second is a twisting wrench. This is just something to hold the other side of your piece while it's in the vise so you can twist it. I use an old monkey wrench, but I've seen some people use a pair of vice grips, which is great because of how fast you're able to get on and off the piece. The other two things that will help you a lot are a ruler and a cold chisel. I use these all the time when I'm trying to duplicate something multiple times over, as it lets me get the same length every time and then mark exactly where I want to cut. If you're interested in doing any kind of blade work, a grinder is going to be very helpful. I personally use 3 different grinders depending on the application. The first I use is a wheel grinder. Mine has a grinding wheel on one side and a wire wheel on the other. I actually end up using the wire wheel far more than the grinding wheel. The second, and my go-to for anything that has to do with blade work, is a benchtop belt grinder. This uses interchangeable belts as an abrasive. I can swap belts in and out either to change the grit size of the abrasive or to put in a new belt when the old one is worn out. And the third and final grinder that I use is an angle grinder. Typically, I use this for cutting, but it can be used to grind a blade if needed. If you are doing grinding, it's good to have a respirator, especially if you're grinding indoors. I grind outdoors and still use a respirator pretty much every time. It doesn't actually take that much space to blacksmith. If you look at the area that I am set up in, it's a rectangle of about 10 feet by 5 feet. And I actually like having a small space as it puts everything very close together. The 3 things that you're going to use the most are your forge, your vise, and your anvil. And so you want to have these almost in a triangle with each other so you can move in a straight line from one to the other without losing time on your heat. The most important step when blacksmithing is deciding to start. Take your dream and make it happen. For some additional tips on how to find an improvised anvil, I have a video here which will help you with that, as well as another video to help give you the basics of how to use an anvil to make the shape that you want. Thank you for watching.